Congratulations for making it so far in the complete web development course. So very briefly, what we have covered so far, we started by learning the basics, HTML and CSS, and we managed to create websites and add decoration and styling to them. And then we learned JavaScript and jQuery, and we created interactive websites like games. And after that, we learned Twitter Bootstrap, and we created responsive websites which will adapt to any device size. And after that, we learned PHP and MySQL, and we created dynamic websites and database-driven websites. Then we moved to WordPress, and we learned how to create powerful websites like blogs or e-commerce websites. Now we are going to move to something different. We're going to learn APIs. So what's an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's used to exchange data between our website or application and an external application. So the way it works is as following. We as developers, we are going to send a request to the API, and the API is going to forward the request to the application in question if the request is allowed. Sometimes we're going to have a limit in terms of the number of requests. We can have a limited number of requests per hour or per day. Okay, and then if the application accepts our request, it's going to return some data. And then we can manipulate that data inside our application or website. So in this chapter, we are going to focus on the Google Maps APIs. So Google Maps comes with many APIs that can communicate all sorts of data with our websites. We can use Google Maps APIs to embed a map on our website. We can customize the map by adding many features, including markers, info windows showing data about locations. We can also add animations, and so on. We can use Google Maps APIs to get directions between two locations. Also, we'll see applications where we can use APIs to calculate the driving distance between two cities, or format an address, or get the postcode of a certain address. We will also cover applications where we can use the Google Maps APIs to search nearby locations. We will cover other applications where we use APIs to fill in location inputs once the user starts typing. So for example, if we have a city input, and once the user starts typing the city, even before they finish, we're going to auto-complete that city name. So all this is going to help us bring more interactivity and comfort to our user experience. Now to get started with the Google Maps APIs, we will need to go to the Google Maps development website, which is developers.google.com/maps. So once you land there, you would need to log in using a Gmail account. If you don't have one, just make sure you create one and then you log in. So we've got several types of Google Maps APIs. The ones we're going to be looking at in our course is the web browsers APIs and the web services APIs. So if we look at the web browsers APIs, these will include APIs like the JavaScript API, which we're going to use to embed maps in our website and customize them. We've got other APIs like the Google Places API, which is a library of the JavaScript API, and we're going to use it to do things like nearby searches and also other things like auto-completing a location input. Now, if we look at the web services APIs, they will include APIs like the geocoding API, which will give us the geographic coordinates of a certain address. So to get started, we're going to need to get a key. So we've got two types of keys. We've got the server keys and the browser keys. Server keys are required by server-side APIs. Browser keys are required by web browser APIs. Okay? But recently, some web browser APIs started requiring server keys. Okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to get one key, which is a server key, and it's going to work for server-side APIs and also for web browser APIs. Okay, so let's click on the Get a Key button, and then click on continue. Now we're going to need to create a new project. So let's just click on continue. Then you can give the key a name and then click on create. Just make sure that you protect the key because it's a secret key. So that's the value of the key. Okay. So just click on OK. So now we've got one key. That's a server key. Now to enable a certain API, we need to go to the API section. So for example, in our first example, we want to embed a map in our website. So we're going to use the Google Maps JavaScript API. So let's click on it. And let's enable it. Okay, so let's go back. Later on, we're going to use the Google Maps geocoding API. So let's just click on that. And this one is enabled already. Okay. Okay. Now let's start creating our examples. So everything we're going to be doing in this chapter is going to be server-side, which means we're going to be using PHP files. So I'm going to open my FireFTP. You can use your free accounts as you've done before. So I'm going to use the Complete Web Development Course website for this. So I'm going to create a new folder inside the root directory of my website. I'm going to call it 9.Google Maps. Okay. And also I'm going to create the same folder inside my Complete Web Development Course folder. Just make sure you do the same so that you can back up all your files. So I'm going to call it the same. So Google Maps. Okay. So let's open this one and let's create our first file and call it introduction.php. Okay. So in our first example, we want to embed a map in our website. So this is the output we would like to get to. Okay, so we want a map inside our website. So what we're going to do, let's open our file using brackets. So Control O. Okay, and also let's access this file. So I'm going to type the address of the website. Okay, followed by 9.Google Maps and then the name of the file, which is 1.introduction.php. So at the moment it's a blank page, and this is what we want to create. Now let's just open the Google Maps folder inside the Complete Web Development Course folder. Okay, so that we can see our backed up files later on. So we're going to need to open the introduction file again. Control O. Okay. So we're going to start our page from scratch. I'm going to get inspired from the documentation inside the Google Maps development website. Okay, but I'm going to explain things in a really simple way. So let's start our page from scratch. So we're going to have a doc type set to HTML for HTML5, and then we're going to have our HTML elements, and then inside we're going to have the head element and the body element. Okay, so in the head element, let's give our page a title. So I'm going to call it introduction, or since we're going to be introduced to the Google Maps JavaScript API, I'm going to call it introduction to Google Maps JavaScript API. Okay, and then we're going to have a viewport metadata. Okay, so the name is viewport, and we're going to do two things. We're going to set the initial scale to 1 when we load the page, and also we're not going to allow the user to zoom in or zoom out. So the user is still going to be able to zoom inside the map or zoom the map in and out, but any other elements in our page, he's not going to be able to zoom in or zoom out. So we're going to use the content, and inside we're going to set the initial scale to 1, okay, and then comma, and also the user scalable to no. Okay. Now let's add a style element. We're going to define some styling later. Okay. Okay, and then let's move to the body element. So at the end of the body element, we are going to create a script element to embed our JavaScript API. So we'll need to give it a source attribute. So the syntax is going to be as following. So it's going to be https :// and then maps.googleapis.com and then /maps/API/JS ? And now we're going to add our key, okay, following key equal sign. So to get the key, we're going to go back to the website where we created our key and then click on credentials. And we can just select our key and copy it from there. Okay, so now we have embedded our Google Maps JavaScript API. Just a quick change there. We need the character encoding meta element, and that's going to be UTF-8. Okay, now to create our map, first of all, we need to create an HTML element, a div, and then we're going to write some JavaScript code to create the map inside the div. So let's create our div first and give it an ID, map for example, and then we're going to create another script at the end of the body element. Okay, so first of all, we need to create an object. Let's call it map. And to create this object, we're going to need a constructor. So we'll use the keyword new followed by the name of the constructor. The constructor is google.maps.map, capital M. And this constructor is going to take a couple of parameters. So the first parameter is the HTML elements, which is our div. So you're going to access the div using its ID. So you're going to use the function getElement by ID. Okay. And the second parameter is an object defining the options of our map. So let's call this object map options and define it before creating the map. So let's write a comment there, set map options. And let's create this variable map options. So this is going to be an object and it's going to include a few options. So the first one is going to be the center of our map, and that's the point where we center our map. In our case, it's going to be London. So the center property is also an object, and it's got two properties, the latitude and the longitude. So for London, the latitude is 51.5 and the longitude is minus 0.1. Okay. So then to move to the next parameter, we're going to use a comma, and let's set the zoom value. So I'm going to go for 7. And also we can choose the type of our map. There are a few types: hybrid, terrain, road map, and satellite. Let's go for satellite. So to set the type, we're going to use the map type ID property. And to set this to satellite, the syntax is google.maps.maptype ID. Okay, capital M, capital T, capital I, and then dot satellite in capital letters. Okay, so let's save this. Just add a comma at the end of the definition of the object. So now if we refresh our page, at the moment we don't see anything. And the reason why is our div at the moment doesn't have any height. So let's go to the style element and give our div a height. So we're accessing the elements using its ID, and let's give it a height, for example, 300 pixels. Let's save and refresh. And now we can see our map. Okay. So if you want to get exactly that, we can set the height to 60% of the height of the page. But before we do that, we're gonna need to set the HTML and the body to a height of 100%. And let's use a percentage there now. Let's save and refresh. That's what we get. Let's change the map type to satellite, to a road map. Okay, we can do this after creating the map. Okay, so we're gonna go at the end, and I'm gonna write setting the map type ID upon construction. So to do this, we're going to access the object map that we defined earlier when we created our map, and we're going to use a method set map type ID. Okay, and this method is going to take one parameter, which is going to be following that syntax, and rather than satellite, we're going to go for roadmap. Okay, so let's save and refresh. And now our type changed to roadmap. Okay. Now let's just make a quick change to our code to make it more readable. So rather than defining the center inside the options, I'm just gonna replace this with a variable my latitude longitude, and I'm gonna define that variable at the beginning. Okay, or just before creating the options. Okay, so we understood how to embed maps to our website. So in the next video, we're going to learn how to add markers and info windows to our maps.